Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Fikrat. This video continues video tutorials dedicated to learning Microsoft Fabric. In the past few videos, we learned real-time analytics components of Microsoft Fabric. So we explored event streams, KQL, which represents no code or and code first experience for Microsoft. So this allows you to create streaming ingestion as well as implement transformation on top of that. However, important part of any real-time system is your ability to monitor and react to your events. So today we're going to look at Data Activator component, which allows you to monitor your signals from your event streams or Power BI dashboard and follow up with different actions, including emails or some other custom actions. Join me to learn more about that. So here's a quick preview of what I'm going to cover today. We'll start with the overview of Data Activator. So we will see what's the purpose of this product, what you can achieve using that, where it can receive data from. In a demo section, we're going to use event streams to populate Data Activator. Then we'll move on to Reflex item and we'll create properties and the triggers within that. Then we'll take a look at actions. We'll learn how to use built-in standard actions like team actions or email actions, as well as we'll create a custom actions. So custom actions allow you to use Power Automate flows, and with Power Automate flows that unlocks you and allows you to create a lot more action types than you may be able to do with standard actions. Let's get started. So what is Data Activator? So Data Activator is a service from Microsoft Fabric which allows you to monitor and react to different conditions. So you can monitor sources like event streams. You can also monitor Power BI dashboards. So monitoring and being able to react to your constantly changing data environment is critical, especially if you are handling real-time systems. There are a few main components of Data Activator. First of all, Microsoft use Reflex and the Data Activator interchangeably. So whenever you create new item, so all the configuration and all the components that you're creating, this happens within Reflex item. If we are talking about main components of the Reflex, then these are properties. So in other words, these are signals that you want to monitor. So these properties can be raw signals, so pure data coming from your source, or you can optionally aggregate your data. So for example, you can aggregate your data by time windows. Once you have identified your properties, then you can create triggers on top of that. So triggers include conditions. So you can compare your input values to certain threshold or some range or some relative values, and then you can decide on actions. There are a few standard actions included in Data Activator, such as email, Teams, but on top of that you can also create custom actions, which allows you to leverage Power Automate flows. And with Power Automate flows, you can do a lot more. So you can write in the database, you can create a ticketing system. So Power Automate has a lot of connection to different systems, which is very handy. All right, I am in Microsoft Fabric. As a first demo, I'm gonna build event streams that will write into Data Activator. But before we go there, let me show you quickly how you can create a Data Activator item and play around that if you are not intending to ingest it from somewhere else. So to do that, I am going to select Data Activator from Workloads. And from here, you can use Reflex sample. So that will create a Reflex item and will populate with the data and all the properties and triggers. That's a good start. And it will give you a good idea about how Data Activator works. Okay, now let me switch back to real-time analytics. I'm going to create event stream from real-time analytics homepage. I'll name my event stream. I assume that you are already familiar with the basics of event stream, but if you would like to learn more about how ingestion and data transformations can be implemented on event stream, please take a look at a few videos that I have put in my channel. For now, I'll just proceed with adding a data source to my event stream. Out of these few options, I'm going to select sample data, and I will name my sample data source. So in terms of data source, I'm going to select bicycles, which is marked as Reflex compatible. The other two data sources are marked as high data rates. So when you are ingesting data into Data Activator, your streaming rate matters. So Microsoft recommends that your streaming rate shouldn't be higher than 1 or 2 events per second. If your streaming rate exceeds that, you'll find Data Activator throttling and your user interface in Reflex may not be responsive. So I'm gonna confirm my selection, and now I can add my destination. I can add permanent destinations like KQL or Lakehouse. However, for the purpose of this demo, it's enough to add just Reflex item. So I'm gonna click this destination button and select Reflex from here. I'll put internal name for that. We'll select my workspace and we'll name Reflex item name. So you can select from existing Reflex items, but in this case we are creating new, so I will click create new, provide new name and confirm. So that completes event stream part of the configuration. So I'll give it a little time and then go to my Fabric home page to find newly created Reflex item. All right, my Reflex item has been created. Now I can navigate to that. The first step within Reflex item is configuring your data. So let me walk you through the screen panels we have in Reflex. So first of all, we have 2 tabs. So data and design tabs. Data tab is for initial configuration. You can create one or more objects, logical objects for your Reflex item. And once you create it, then you will switch to Design tab and will continue rest of configurations there. Whatever events that you are feeding to Data Activator will show up here. So you can see the events that we have already started. On the central part of the screen, we have two panels. So at the top, we are seeing the sample of data. So in this case, this data represents bike renting information from, I believe, London. So that's play data. We have signal timestamp. And then we have bike point ID. So it's, I think it's bike station ID, which can be treated as a primary identifier for this data. Then you have some other data, some string type data. So for example, street, neighborhood, and we have some numeric attribute of this data. At the bottom, you have event count panel, which will show you statistics of streaming ingestion. By default, it's 20. It shows 24 hours history, but you can change it to, let's say, 1 hour, so whatever is relevant for you. And you will see a nice chart displaying ingestion rate. Okay, so let's start by creating object. So this data represents bike information. So I can say bike rents. And then I can assign key for that, primary key. So I'm gonna select bike point ID. And optionally, you can add certain properties there. So for example, I am looking to have street, number of bikes, number of empty docks, and confirm. So the properties, you can add properties from design page as well. So whatever you select here is just starting point. And then I'll select save and go to design mode. Okay, so in design mode, we have two main panels. On the left hand side, we have a hierarchical folder for objects. So this is an object that I just created, bike rents, but you can create more than one object from the same data source. The events folder will show you your Azure raw data. So as you select it, on the central part of the screen, you will see charts with all this data. So you can see that we have color-coded sets of data. So because we have selected bike points as a primary key, we have one chart for each bike station. By default, we get 5 random selected data points, which you can see from here, but you can always change this random bike stations to something else, or even add more bike stations like this. On the left hand side, we also have properties. So we get the properties that we already added, but we can add new properties using new property button. And finally, we have triggers folder. Right now it's empty, but we can use new trigger to create triggers here. So let's take a look at the properties. So if I select one of these properties, it will show you definitions of this property here. So you can see what data source it's coming from, its name, which is customizable, and the column from source data. And here you will see representation of this particular signal or this particular value. Your properties can be either simple properties coming directly from your raw data, or it could be aggregate data. And you can use add button here to aggregate data. In many cases, it makes sense to aggregate your properties. So, for example, you may decide to monitor average over time, and then you can create multiple triggers to monitor for different conditions for the same property. So let me show it on the example of new property. So let's say I'm looking to get average per each 5 minutes for number of bikes. So I'm gonna create new property here, and we'll say my source for this property is coming from existing property. So because we have this 3, and because we have number of bikes among our properties, I can select from here. In case you don't find it, of course, you can come here and can select and can see all the available columns from your data source. So I'm gonna select number of bikes from here, and then I'll say summarize average over time. So we have other aggregate functions as well, maximum over time, sum over time. But for my purposes, I'll just select average over time, and I'll say aggregate over each 5 minutes. And I'll name my property and save it. So once I configured my property, the next logical step is to create triggers. So I'm gonna use new trigger button to start trigger configuration process. So let me name it number of bikes. And then the first step in this process is to select your column. You can select among existing properties, or you can go to your raw data and select any column from there. So I'm gonna use number of bikes properties that I have created earlier, and it will immediately show you charts for that properties. You can also optionally add aggregation to that. That will allow you to create same kind of aggregations that we have considered with properties. I'll just leave it as is. So I am looking to monitor my raw data in this case. And we'll move to the next step, which is determining the conditions of this trigger. So if I expand this, I'll see 3 categories of conditions. Numeric conditions allow you to compare against numeric values. There are lots of different conditions here. For example, becomes greater than certain value, or you can say enter certain range, or you can say is greater than a certain value. The difference between this is greater and becomes greater, as the name suggests, is that in some cases you may want to get alerts on every time when your signal exceeds certain values, or you want to get it only once when you pass that threshold. There are also some logical conditions here which simply validates your properties values against true or false, or you can also select from common conditions which specifies change from or change to conditions. So I'm gonna move to numeric and select is greater than. So let me take a look at my data. So I can see that most of my data lies below 10 bikes, but there are some of them which exceeds that number. So let's say I'm looking for any bike stations exceeding number 10. So I'm gonna say 10. And as soon as I specify my conditions, I will see potential match there. with Z time. So I can see two bike stations have have number of match in certain periods. So you can see similar charts here as well. The nice thing is that this will show you not only future match but past matches as well. So if you have noticed, there are a few other customizations that you can add to this condition. You can say send me alert each time my numbers exceed this value, so which is default selection, or you can say send me alert only when my numbers exceed after a certain number of times. Or you can also say send me alert whenever my signal exceeds certain values and stays in that range for some time. The last step in my configuration is to determine the action. So if I expand action drop combo box, I'll see three options here: email, team message, and custom actions. Custom action is grayed out because I haven't created custom actions yet. So that's something that I'll show in a few minutes. But for now, I'll just proceed with email configuration, which pre-populates, which creates email template with pre-populated columns here. So you can customize all of this, of course. You can specify folks that needs to receive alerts. You can also put specific content, and what's very handy, you can also send factual information. So let's say I want to see number of bikes and the number of empty dogs within this email. And that's pretty much from trigger configuration. So that concludes configurations, and all I need is to save my trigger. So using save button, then I can start my trigger. So remember that you won't receive any alerts unless you specifically start the trigger, and you can always come here and stop your trigger. So I'll give it little time, and we'll check my email to see how my alerts work. So one thing to mention here is that when determining your conditions, you also have ability to add a filter to that, which very useful in many scenarios. For example, the threshold I am setting here, in some cases I want to have threshold per each category, per each key data points. For example, for each bike station, I see that some upper and lower limit, which typical upper and lower limits. So I might want to monitor my data by bike station. So in other words, I want to, in many cases, I'd like to add a bike station ID, your primary identifier, as additional filter here. There is add filter option here, and however, in some cases I see that I have ability to select from any properties. However, in some cases I don't see all of my properties. So unfortunately, I don't have answer for that. If any of you guys are able to figure out the reason, just please put it in your comment section of this video. I will be happy to learn. For now, I'll just remove this. All right, so my trigger has been running for some time. Now I'm going to check my emails, and I can see that I already received some email alerts. So I can see that I have, so email contains number of bikes, number of empty dogs, and I can easily navigate to Reflex screen using view details button. All right, now that we learned how to create triggers with basic actions, let's talk about custom actions. So custom actions allow you to create Power Automate flow, which opens the door for a lot more action types than built-in Data Activator actions. And you can create that actions from custom actions button. I'm going to use create button, and I will name my custom action. So I'll say my custom action. And then optionally, I can provide certain fields that I'm gonna pass to Power Automate flow. So let's say I'm looking for names of people who will receive this certain notifications. So I'll put it name and hit add button. Then I can provide more than one field here. As you will see shortly, you can also include additional fields from action screen itself. So, but for now, I'll just proceed with the next step, which is copying connection string. So I'll click copy button, and then that will make it available create flow button. So I'll click create Power Automate flow button, and that creates a new flow and adds a trigger for that. So if I select this trigger, then I have a box window where I can put my connection string. For now, I'll just proceed with the next steps, which is adding different actions. There are lots of different actions in Power Automate. So I'm gonna use variable action so that I will be able to demonstrate how to pass different fields to my flow. And from variable, I will select initialize variable, and I will name my variable. So I know that I am passing name field to my flow, so I'll set one variable as vName, and I will assign string data type to that. Now, in terms of values, I need to provide expressions which should extract this field from my trigger. For that, I'm gonna navigate to Microsoft document, which includes these expressions. I will include the link for this documentation so that you could it handy. But for now, I'll just copy this expression, come back to my flow, and paste this. And once it's done, all I need is just to put name of the field that I am expecting. So because my field name was name, so I will put name, and I will also provide the name for my flow. So let's say I want to name it my first flow, and I'll save my flow. So now I'm getting green message saying that my flow configuration is good. I'm gonna add another field here to receive number of bikes. So, and we'll follow the same process. Optionally, I can also use flow checker button to see if my flow configuration is valid. Once my flow configuration is complete, I can navigate back to my Data Activator screen. I see that my screen has changed, which is a good sign. That means that Data Activator thinks that my Power Automate step, configuration step, was successful, and now all I need is just to click done button. So that will complete custom actions configuration. Now that I created custom actions, I can navigate to Act screen in my data, in my trigger configuration, and select that action. So I'm gonna use custom actions. As you can see now, this option became available, and I'm gonna select my action from here. So remember, I have added name field there, so now I can pass any string value there. So I'll put my own name. I'll put my name here, and then just like with email notifications, you can also include any properties that you have created. So I'm going to use number of bikes here, and I will save my trigger and then start it. I'll let it run for some time, and we'll come back to my Power Automate and check in a few minutes. All right, I am back in my Power Automate flow history, so I can see that my trigger has fired several times. Now I can open any of these executions and review my execution flow. And if I click my trigger, I can examine the output from this node. So then I can see that name field, name and the number of bikes field have been passed successfully. All right, I'm gonna wrap up discussion here. To summarize, we have learned how to use event streams to create data activator or reflex items. We have also learned how to create different reflex components, including properties, triggers, conditions, actions. Finally, we also learned how to create custom actions using Power Automate Flow, which allows you to create lots of different kind of custom actions. I hope today's discussion was helpful for you. I want to thank you, and I'll see you in future videos.